It begins like a scene from a movie. A crowded theater in New York City. Flashing cameras. Excited whispers. A rising young actress in black velvet locks eyes with Hollywood's most dangerous new rebel. Time seems to stop. For just a moment, the chaos of stardom fades, and all that's left is two people staring at each other, as though fate itself had brought them together. The year was 1989. She was Winona Ryder, pale, mysterious, the queen of teen gothic cool after Beetlejuice and Heathers. He was Johnny Depp, a smoldering, restless heartthrob who hated being called one, fresh from his breakthrough in 21 Jump Street. The connection was instant. Within months, they were inseparable. Within a year, they were engaged. For fans and magazines alike, this wasn't just another Hollywood couple. This was a love story, raw, passionate, rebellious, and almost too perfect to last. The 1990s had no shortage of celebrity romances. But Johnny and Winona weren't like the polished red carpet duos before them. They were edgy, bohemian, a little dark, and entirely authentic. He wore tattoos and leather. She wore black lace and thrift store chic. Together, they created a look, a mood, a fantasy that would define an era. But like so many Hollywood fairy tales, their story had a tragic edge. For all the beauty and passion, there were cracks, age gaps, fame, jealousy, and relentless press intrusion. Their breakup in 1993 didn't just break their own hearts. It broke the hearts of an entire generation who believed in them. And yet, decades later, their romance still lingers in pop culture. Johnny's tattoo, once Winona Forever, now Wino Forever, remains one of Hollywood's most iconic symbols of lost love. Winona still calls Depp her first true love. And fans, whether they lived through it or discovered it on TikTok, still ask the same question. What really happened to Johnny and Winona? This is their story. A love that burned too brightly, too quickly, but left a legacy that refuses to fade. In the late 1980s, Hollywood was a restless place. Teen idols filled glossy magazines, blockbuster films dominated theaters, and a new generation of actors was emerging. Actors who didn't quite fit the polished studio mold of the past. This was the moment when two of the most unlikely outsiders would collide, creating one of Hollywood's most talked-about love stories. Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder. Johnny Depp's path to stardom was anything but straightforward. Born John Christopher Depp II in 1963 in Owensboro, Kentucky, he didn't grow up in the glow of Hollywood lights. His childhood was unsettled. His family moved frequently, and by the time Johnny was a teenager, his parents divorced. Restless and rebellious, Johnny found solace not in academics but in music. At 15, he dropped out of high school to chase a rock and roll dream, playing guitar in garage bands. He eventually landed in Los Angeles with his band, The Kids, scraping by while trying to make it in the cutthroat world of music. But as fate would have it, music wasn't where Johnny's story would unfold. Encouraged by a friend, Nicolas Cage, Johnny reluctantly went to auditions. In 1984, he landed his first film role in Wes Craven's A Nightmare on Elm Street. He played the boyfriend who meets a gruesome end, but the small part left an impression. A few years later, the role that would change his life arrived. Officer Tom Hansen on 21 Jump Street. Overnight, Depp became a teen idol. Posters of his face lined teenage bedrooms, and his brooding looks made him a heartthrob. But Johnny hated it. He resented the label, the shallow fame, and the screaming fans who adored his image more than his craft. Behind his piercing eyes and aloof smirk was a man craving authenticity, someone who wanted to be more than a poster boy. While Johnny was reluctantly becoming a household name, another star was rising, this time from the opposite end of the spectrum. Winona Laura Horowitz, who would later be known as Winona Ryder, was born in 1971 in Winona, Minnesota, the town that gave her her stage name. Her childhood was unconventional. Her parents were part of the counterculture movement, intellectuals who filled their home with books and art. Winona was small, shy, and introverted, often burying herself in novels instead of socializing. She didn't fit the mold of a Hollywood starlet, and that was exactly why she stood out. In 1986, Winona made her film debut in Lucas. But it was Tim Burton's Beetlejuice in 1988 that launched her into stardom. Playing Lydia Dietz, the goth teenager fascinated by death and the macabre, Winona struck a chord with audiences who didn't see themselves in the typical cheerleaders and prom queens that Hollywood offered. She became the face of outsiders, pale, soulful, intellectual, and a little mysterious. The following year, she starred in Heathers, a dark teen comedy that cemented her reputation as the actress who spoke to a generation disillusioned by shallow, picture-perfect teen movies. By the late 1980s, Winona Ryder wasn't just another actress, she was a cultural phenomenon. It was 1989 when fate brought Johnny and Winona together. The setting was the premiere of Great Balls of Fire. In New York City, Winona, just 17 years old, was there, already a rising star. Johnny, 26, was in attendance as well. The moment their eyes met, Johnny later recalled, was straight out of a film. It was a classic glance, like the zoom lenses in West Side Story, and everything else went black and white. It was just her. For Johnny, it was love at first sight, the kind that makes everything else blur away. For Winona, who was still young and relatively private, the moment was overwhelming in its intensity. But the spark was undeniable. They began seeing each other soon after that night. Despite the 9-year age difference, their connection was immediate and deep. Within 5 months, Johnny proposed. In an industry where relationships were often fleeting, their whirlwind romance stood out as something bold, passionate, and real. The engagement set off a media frenzy. Fans and journalists alike couldn't get enough of the pairing. Here was Hollywood's bad boy, the rebellious heartthrob who hated his own fame, and the gothic princess of a new generation. Together, they seemed almost too perfect. Their relationship was splashed across magazine covers. They were photographed everywhere, walking hand in hand, whispering to each other at premieres, looking inseparable at award shows. Unlike polished, staged couples of the past, Johnny and Winona exuded authenticity. Their affection seemed unfiltered, their chemistry undeniable. Johnny called Winona his first true love. Winona, shy but honest, echoed the sentiment, saying she couldn't imagine life without him. They weren't just dating, they were defining an entire cultural moment. The early 1990s youth looked at them and saw a reflection of themselves. Johnny and Winona weren't glossy perfection. They were dark, edgy, romantic, and real. They wore thrift store clothes, smoked cigarettes on street corners, and looked like characters pulled out of a moody indie film. For fans, they represented a new kind of love story, one that wasn't scripted, but felt raw and authentic. By the end of 1989 and into 1990, Johnny and Winona had become Hollywood's ultimate young couple. They weren't just two actors in love, they were cultural icons, the face of a generation that craved authenticity over polish. Together, they embodied the spirit of the time, rebellious but vulnerable, passionate but fragile. To their fans, they weren't just dating. They were living proof that true love could still exist in the glare of Hollywood lights. But behind the headlines and magazine spreads, Johnny and Winona were just two young people swept up in something bigger than themselves. They couldn't have known it then, but their love story would soon transcend their own lives, immortalized forever on the silver screen. And it all began with that single glance, a moment when Johnny Depp saw Winona Ryder across a crowded theater, and everything else faded away. When Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder's romance moved from the private sphere into their professional lives, it was as if Hollywood itself wanted to bottle their chemistry and project it onto the screen. The timing was perfect. Tim Burton, who had already played a pivotal role in Winona's rise with Beetlejuice, was preparing a new film, an odd, gothic fairy tale about a lonely man with scissors for hands. It was called Edward Scissorhands. Burton cast Johnny in the lead role, a decision that would prove transformative for Depp. Tired of being the poster boy for teen magazines, Johnny craved a part that would show the depth of his abilities. The role of Edward, a gentle outcast with an unfinished body and scissors where his fingers should have been, was strange, poetic, and tragic. It gave Johnny the chance to prove himself as a serious actor. Winona was cast as Kim, the suburban girl who looks past Edward's frightening exterior and sees the soul within. The storyline mirrored aspects of their real-life relationship. Winona, the ethereal outsider, recognizing Johnny's yearning for something beyond fame. On set, their real love spilled into their performances. The way Kim gazes at Edward in quiet moments carried the weight of true affection, the unspoken tenderness of two people deeply entangled in each other's lives. When the film was released in 1990, it was more than just a success, it became a cultural landmark. Critics praised its originality, audiences adored its melancholy charm, and both Johnny and Winona were lauded for their performances. Yet for fans, the magic extended beyond the screen. Watching Edward and Kim fall in love was like peeking into Johnny and Winona's own romance, only heightened by fairytale tragedy. The film immortalized their relationship, forever preserving it in cinematic history. Off-screen, their love only deepened. Johnny famously tattooed "Winona Forever" on his arm, a bold declaration of commitment in an industry notorious for fleeting romances. It wasn't just ink on skin. It was a statement that, at least in that moment, he truly believed their love would never fade. Winona, shy and private, was less demonstrative in public, but those who knew her said she was deeply devoted, utterly wrapped up in Johnny. As their relationship grew, so did the scrutiny. The press couldn't get enough of them, dubbing them Hollywood's ultimate couple. Photographers followed them everywhere, capturing moments of them strolling arm in arm, whispering to each other at industry events, or simply sitting together in quiet comfort. Fans saw in them a love story that felt genuine, untainted by publicity stunts or calculated PR. But with fame came pressure. Johnny's reputation as a rebel often drew headlines for his late-night antics, bar fights, and clashes with paparazzi. Winona, who battled her own insecurities and bouts of anxiety, found herself overwhelmed at times by the glare of attention. Still, the bond between them seemed unbreakable. In interviews, Johnny spoke about Winona with a kind of reverence, describing her as his first real love, the person who had shown him what devotion meant. Winona, in her quiet way, echoed his sentiments, often speaking about how safe she felt with him, how he grounded her in a world that often felt chaotic. Together, they were more than just another Hollywood couple. They were a cultural symbol, a reminder that even in an industry built on illusion, real love could exist. Their relationship influenced fashion, with fans emulating Winona's dark, bohemian style and Johnny's thrift store, grunge aesthetic. They were the cool kids of the early 90s, and everyone wanted to be like them, or at least believe in a love like theirs. Yet beneath the beauty and the fairy tale, small cracks began to appear. Johnny's restless nature, his tendency toward self-destruction, and the pressures of being constantly watched began to weigh on them. Winona, barely out of her teenage years, was navigating not just a high-profile relationship but also the dizzying heights of fame. By the early 90s, she was one of the most in-demand actresses in Hollywood, juggling major film projects while trying to hold on to a love that consumed her. For a time, though, they held the world in the palm of their hands. Edward Scissorhands had not just cemented their careers, it had carved their love story into the collective memory of a generation. The film's haunting final scene, where Kim whispers to Edward, knowing they can never truly be together, would later feel like a prophecy. But in that moment, Johnny and Winona were still living their fairy tale, still convinced that their story was destined to last forever. The 1990s were theirs, and for a while, Hollywood truly believed in their love. By the early 1990s, Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder had become more than just actors in love, they were cultural icons. Their faces were splashed across magazine covers, their names mentioned in every entertainment column, and their romance dissected by fans who clung to their every gesture. For the outside world, they seemed untouchable. But as often happens in Hollywood, the brighter the light, the darker the shadows it casts. Johnny, despite his devotion to Winona, was a man torn between worlds. Fame had come quickly, and though he craved meaningful roles, he was also living in the fast lane. He bought the Viper Room nightclub in Los Angeles, a hotspot that attracted artists, musicians, and Hollywood's elite. It became infamous for its late-night chaos, its smoky atmosphere, and its dangerous allure. Johnny was always drawn to the edge, to places that felt raw and unpredictable, but this darker lifestyle clashed with the fragile, bookish world Winona carried with her. Winona was still so young, barely in her 20s, and her sensitive nature made her ill-suited for the relentless attention. Paparazzi trailed her every move, and gossip magazines scrutinized her expressions, her clothes, her moods. What had once been exciting, the thrill of being Hollywood's most photographed couple, became suffocating. She loved Johnny deeply, But the pressure of being half of Winona and Johnny was overwhelming. Their love was genuine, but the timing was cruel. Johnny was entering his 30s, wrestling with the demons of fame, identity, and excess, while Winona was still navigating early adulthood. Both were rising higher in their careers, often pulled in different directions by film schedules and obligations. The world wanted them together constantly, but real life didn't allow that luxury. Distance, misunderstandings, and the weight of expectation began to wear them down. Adding to the strain was Johnny's volatility. His reputation as Hollywood's bad boy wasn't just an invention of the press. He was prone to fights, destructive outbursts, and battles with paparazzi. Tabloids eagerly reported his every misstep, often dragging Winona into the narrative. She, meanwhile, was private by nature, uncomfortable with the circus surrounding them. Their differences, which once seemed to complement each other, slowly started to clash. The end, when it came, was devastating. In 1993, after 4 years together, Johnny and Winona broke off their engagement. For both, it was more than just the end of a relationship. It was the shattering of something they had believed in completely. Johnny later described the breakup as one of the darkest moments of his life, admitting that he struggled to cope with the loss. Winona was equally devastated, her heartbreak so profound that it reportedly led to a period of depression and self-doubt. Johnny's tattoo, once proudly declaring Winona Forever, became a painful reminder. Rather than removing it entirely, he altered it to read Winona Forever, a bittersweet attempt at humor that barely concealed the depth of his grief. It became one of Hollywood's most iconic symbols of lost love, etched into his skin as permanently as Winona was etched into his memory. For Winona, the breakup left scars that went far deeper than the gossip column suggested. In later interviews, she admitted that she had never experienced heartbreak as intense as the one she felt when things ended with Johnny. It wasn't just the loss of a boyfriend, it was the loss of her first true love, the man who had shaped her young adulthood, who had shared with her the dizzying highs and crushing lows of fame. The public, too, mourned their separation. Fans who had believed in the fairy tale felt betrayed by reality. The couple that had seemed destined to last forever had proven to be just as fragile as any other. Magazines speculated endlessly about what went wrong, fueling rumors that only deepened the pain. Neither Johnny nor Winona offered much explanation, preferring to protect what they had shared rather than turn it into tabloid fodder. The cultural impact of their breakup was enormous. For a generation of young people, Johnny and Winona had represented the possibility of true love in an artificial world. Their split felt like the end of an era, a harsh reminder that even the most beautiful love stories could unravel. In the years that followed, both actors carried the weight of their lost romance. Johnny threw himself into more daring film roles, working with directors like Tim Burton and Jim Jarmusch to reinvent himself as a serious actor. His performances grew darker, more complex, reflecting the turmoil inside him. Winona, meanwhile, continued to shine on screen, starring in films like The Age of Innocence and Little Women. But behind her success was a quiet sadness, a sense that something irreplaceable had been lost. Their breakup wasn't caused by betrayal or scandal. It was the slow erosion of two people caught in the whirlwind of fame, youth, and expectation. They loved each other fiercely, but the world they lived in made it nearly impossible for that love to survive. In that sense, their story wasn't just personal, it was emblematic of Hollywood itself, a place where beauty and tragedy are forever entwined. Years later, both would look back on their relationship with a kind of bittersweet tenderness. Neither spoke ill of the other. In fact, their words were always filled with respect, as if they both understood that what they had shared was too rare, too precious, to tarnish. Theirs wasn't just a breakup. It was the kind of heartbreak that leaves a permanent mark, shaping who you are forever. And yet, even in its end, their love continued to live on, in the tattoo, in the film they had made together, in the photographs that fans still treasure. Johnny and Winona may have walked separate paths, but their time together had already entered Hollywood mythology. The fall of their relationship wasn't the end of their story. If anything, it was the moment that transformed them from a couple into legends. Time has a way of transforming love stories. Some fade quietly into memory, while others take on a life of their own, becoming part of cultural folklore. For Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder, their romance didn't simply vanish when the engagement ended. It grew into something bigger than either of them, a legend that continues to haunt Hollywood decades later. In the years after their breakup, both Johnny and Winona found themselves constantly compared to the love they once shared. For Johnny, no relationship ever seemed to capture the same intensity in the public imagination. He would go on to date and even marry others, but whenever his love life made headlines, journalists inevitably invoked Winona's name. That tattoo, altered though it was, became a permanent reminder, and every photograph of it sparked whispers of the past. Winona faced a similar fate. Though she had other relationships, she often admitted in interviews that what she experienced with Johnny was unlike anything else. She spoke candidly, years later, about how deeply that love and heartbreak had shaped her, about how it was the kind of connection that comes only once in a lifetime. There was no bitterness in her tone, only reverence, as though she recognized that what they shared was too rare to diminish with regret. What kept their story alive wasn't just nostalgia, it was the cultural moment they had embodied. In the early 1990s, Johnny and Winona weren't simply two actors in love. They were a symbol of authenticity in an industry built on artifice. They represented a kind of romantic ideal for a generation that was tired of polished perfection. Their thrift store clothes, their moody stares, their quiet defiance of Hollywood norms, it all resonated. Fans didn't just watch them. They felt like they were part of their story. And then there was Edward Scissorhands. The film became more than just a gothic fairy tale, it became a time capsule of their relationship. Decades later, audiences still watch Edward and Kim's bittersweet love story with the knowledge that the emotions on screen were real. That haunting final scene, where Kim tells Edward she will always love him even as she leaves him behind, feels inseparable from the reality of Johnny and Winona's own romance. Art and life blurred in a way that few Hollywood couples have ever achieved. As the years passed, their legacies took different turns. Johnny became one of the biggest movie stars in the world, his career defined by bold choices and eccentric characters. Yet even at the height of his fame, when Pirates of the Caribbean turned him into a global icon, the shadow of his relationship with Winona lingered. Fans still talked about it, still remembered him not just as Jack Sparrow or Edward Scissorhands, but as the young man who once promised forever to a girl named Winona. Winona's path was more turbulent. By the early 2000s, she faced struggles that nearly derailed her career. The pressures of fame, personal challenges, and a very public scandal pushed her away from the spotlight. For years, she lived more quietly, away from the Hollywood machine. But through it all, the memory of her romance with Johnny remained untouched, a part of her story that fans cherished no matter what else was happening in her life. Then came her resurgence. With her role as Joyce Byers in Stranger Things, Winona reminded the world of her talent, her depth, and her unique presence on screen. Suddenly, a new generation discovered her, and with that discovery came renewed interest in her past. Articles and videos revisited her relationship with Johnny, introducing the story to younger fans who hadn't even been born when their love first captured the world's attention. What had once been a private romance became immortalized as one of Hollywood's great legends, retold again and again across decades. Part of what keeps their story alive is its imperfection. Unlike scripted romances that end with happily ever after, Johnny and Winona's love ended in heartbreak. Yet that heartbreak is precisely what makes it unforgettable. Theirs was not a sanitized fairy tale but a raw, passionate, deeply human connection that couldn't withstand the weight of fame and youth. That reality, tragic and beautiful at the same time, resonates far more deeply than a perfect ending ever could. Even today, when Johnny or Winona's names trend, their past love story inevitably resurfaces. Social media is filled with old photographs, clips from interviews, and fan tributes that celebrate what they once shared. Younger fans, who never lived through the early 90s, discover them anew and are captivated by the intensity of their connection. In an era where celebrity relationships often feel transactional, Johnny and Winona's love stands out as something raw, messy, and real. Perhaps that's why it endures. Their story is not just about two people who fell in love, it's about what it meant to an entire generation. It's about the way they made fans believe in something pure, even in a world dominated by cameras and publicity. It's about how their relationship, though brief, captured a truth about love, that it can be transformative, that it can define a period of your life, and that sometimes its very fragility is what makes it unforgettable. For Johnny, Winona was the woman who changed his understanding of love. For Winona, Johnny was the man who defined her youth. For the rest of us, they were proof that even in Hollywood, where everything feels manufactured, there could exist a romance that was achingly authentic. They may have walked separate paths, but in the collective imagination, they are forever linked. Edward and Kim, Johnny and Winona, two stars whose love story will never truly fade. Their legacy is not in how long they lasted, but in how deeply they mattered. A glance across a crowded premiere, an engagement that set the world on fire, a film that turned their love into a gothic fairy tale, and a heartbreak that echoed through decades, this is what makes their story eternal. Hollywood has seen countless couples rise and fall, but few have etched themselves so indelibly into its history. Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder did not get their happy ending, but they got something rarer: immortality. Every love story has a beginning and an end, but some never truly fade. Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder's romance may have lasted only a few years in the early 1990s, but its echoes still linger, reverberating across time like a haunting melody. It wasn't just a relationship, it was a cultural moment, a snapshot of youth, passion, and vulnerability that has endured far beyond its lifespan. When people look back, what stands out is not the breakup, not the tabloid frenzy, but the purity of what they once shared. That first glance at the great balls of fire. Premiere, the whirlwind engagement, the fairy tale of Edward Scissorhands, the tattoo that once read Winona Forever. These moments have crystallized into legend. They remind us of the power of first love, of how deeply it can carve itself into your soul, even if it doesn't last forever. For Johnny, Winona was the muse who inspired him at a crucial time in his life. She was the one who pulled him out of the shallow image of a teen idol and reminded him of what it meant to love with authenticity. For Winona, Johnny was the man who transformed her youth into something extraordinary, who gave her both the magic of true devotion and the ache of true heartbreak. Together, they were more than a couple. They were symbols of a generation that yearned for something real in an artificial world. What makes their story so unforgettable is not its perfection, but its fragility. The truth is, Johnny and Winona were human. They were young, flawed, and overwhelmed by the pressures of fame. They loved fiercely, but they were swept up in a storm too powerful to control. And in that way, their story reflects a universal truth. Sometimes love, no matter how deep, cannot withstand the weight of circumstance. Sometimes it burns too brightly to last. And yet, isn't that what makes it beautiful? If Johnny and Winona had quietly dated and drifted apart without a trace, their love would have been forgotten. Instead, because it was so intense, so raw, and so public, it has lived on. Fans still share their photographs, still revisit Edward Scissorhands, still whisper about the tattoo and the heartbreak. Younger generations, who weren't even alive when Johnny and Winona were together, discover them anew and fall under the same spell. That is the mark of a love story that transcends time. Hollywood has always been obsessed with romance, but most of its great stories are written in scripts, acted out under stage lights. What makes Johnny and Winona different is that their story wasn't fiction, it was real. The glances, the kisses, the devotion, the heartbreak, it all came from a place of truth. They weren't playing roles, they were living them. And when reality collided with art, it created something immortal. Even now, decades later, when Johnny or Winona are mentioned, their names are often followed by each other's. It is as though the world cannot separate them, as though their connection was so powerful it became part of who they are in the public imagination. That's not something that fades with time. That's not something that can be rewritten. That's something eternal. So what do we take from their story? Perhaps it is the reminder that love, in its purest form, is not measured by longevity but by intensity. Johnny and Winona may not have grown old together, but in the years they did share, they created something so authentic that it still resonates today. They remind us of the beauty and the pain of first love, the kind that shapes you, scars you, and stays with you no matter where life takes you. Their story is not a cautionary tale. It is not a tragedy. It is a testament. A testament to the fact that even in the glare of Hollywood, even under the suffocating weight of fame, two people can find each other and create something real. a testament to the idea that love doesn't have to last forever to be unforgettable. As the credits roll on their romance, what remains is not the end but the impact. Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder may have walked separate paths, but together they gave the world a love story that feels timeless, almost mythic. They were Edward and Kim. They were Johnny and Winona. They were, for a brief and beautiful moment, Hollywood's first true love of the 1990s. And in the hearts of those who remember, they always will be.